Greetings, adventure. Welcome to the D20 Academy podcast. I'm Shalo Kaneshiro, and this is episode 32, Monster Monday on the Drow. Hey guys, welcome to another installment of Monster Monday. This is one of the favorite episodes that I do. It's the one where I make on the first Monday of every month, and I use it to highlight and feature a really cool monster from D&D. I kind of start with a brief history of the monster in past game revisions, kind of what inspired its conception, all that kind of stuff. I go into its appearance, its abilities, the monster's history, lore, culture, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, how to incorporate this monster into your games. Okay, and today is about one of the most famous monster races of all time, the Drow. If you've probably heard of them already, if you're even a little bit familiar with D&D or even just fantasy fiction in general. But if not, or you just want some more information on them, then this is the episode right here to listen to. This is where I'm going to break down everything that has to do with them, get you guys inspired, and help you out if you ever think about using these guys in your own game. If you guys want updates on how the podcast is doing, what's going to be happening in the future, you want to have a say in all that kind of stuff, you can go ahead and follow me on Instagram at D20_Academy. And it's also a lot of help as well if you have some friends or some people you know that like the game or trying to get into the game, and pointing them towards this podcast can really help me out a lot. I work really hard on this thing every week. And just getting new listeners, getting new people to come to D&D and get inspired and learn more is just means a lot to me, and my work being able to reach more and more people, and being able to help DMs and players and stuff like that, it means a lot to me. So with all that out of the way, let's get right into the Drow. Okay, so let's just get started with kind of some brief history of the Drow in the game and kind of its revisions over time, all that kind of stuff. So the Drow technically appear in every edition of the game, though in first edition it's only that they are just mentioned. They don't have stat blocks or really any lore about them. Just described as evil elves who live underground. That's basically all they get in the first edition. Now, society, lore, all that kind of stuff about the Drow was further developed in the Monsters Compendium Volume 2 in 1989 and the Drow of the Underdark by Ed Greenwood in 1991. And then, of course, second edition and beyond featured the Drow as monsters with stat blocks, and also Drow as a playable race for PCs. Which is actually something really interesting, which I'm going to touch on a little bit later here in the episode. But Drow are one of the only monsters who have monster stat blocks, tons of different kinds of monster stat blocks. In every edition are really popular monsters, but are also characters, creatures that you can play as a player as well. Because you obviously can't play as a beholder or as a dragon or anything like that. But Drows actually can be monsters or players, which is kind of interesting, and I think also led to their popularity. See, Drow are incredibly iconic, and they, by some, are considered Gary Gygax's biggest and most influential contribution to the fantasy genre, second, of course, to Dungeons & Dragons itself. Studies also show that books with Drows on the cover sell more than books without Drow on the covers, meaning that fantasy fans love the Drow, and they've only increased in popularity in recent times. Now, something that you may know about, something that put the Drow on the map, really increased popularity, was the Legend of Drizzt novel series by the legendary fantasy author R.A. Salvatore. It featured the iconic Drow fighter Drizzt, who went against the typical evil alignment of his people and became a famous hero of the Forgotten Realms. They're quite good books. I read almost the entire series about a year or so back. And yeah, Drizzt is a great character, and the Drow and their society and all that kind of stuff is really, really detailed in the first three books of that series. But yeah, Drow are really popular. I mean, even if you're completely unfamiliar with Dungeons & Dragons and you only know it by the name or a basic concept of what it is, but you've never played it or anything like that, you probably can still recognize a Drow. They appear in lots of different places in fantasy literature, and lots of different fan art and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people like to draw a Drow, and a lot of people like to play Drow, and when they're drawing their characters. So there's a ton of like Drow art out there, Drow stories, whatever it is. And so clearly people love the Drow a lot. And you'll see why in a second. They are a really, really cool race of creatures. They're really cool monsters. Um, so let me just kind of get into more detail what I'm talking about here. So Drow appear similar in look and stature to regular D&D elves, but there are a few like stark differences. Their skin is ebony black, just like straight black, even kind of ranging into kind of dark purple range. And their eyes range from like red to purple, and their hair is white, like white or silver. They're pretty short for elves actually. They only stand around 5 feet tall, and they have slender faces, long pointed ears, kind of classic elf stuff. They typically wear clothing befitting their stations, like heavy armor if they're soldiers, or like studded leather if they're like assassins or scouts, or like chainmail and robes if they're priestesses or mages. And these are usually like black or silver, and they're detailed with like spider motifs and web designs. And you'll learn about why that is like that in a second here. So getting into kind of lore of the Drow, what they're like, what their culture's like, what their society like. They are elves that were banished underground by their other elven kin, whether they be high elves or wood elves or whatever, for worshipping the evil god Lolth rather than the elf god Corellin. Drow are ruthless slavers. They build empires miles beneath the surface in the Underdark, and they brave the dangers of the Underdark every day. Now, these empires that they build are ruled over by several Drow houses, which are like a large mafia-like families that are constantly like vying for power. Now, the Drow society is built around one thing, and that is Lolth. Their devotion to the Spider Queen is reflected in every aspect of their society. So, for example, women are considered superior and always hold the place of priestesses of Lolth or the heads of the house. Males can only serve as slaves, soldiers, or mages. They can never attain certain higher up roles that the women can. And that's because Lolth is a female goddess, and that's like one of her tenets, is just that women are superior. So as long as the Drow serve Lolth and center their society around Lolth, women will always be considered superior, and men have only a couple positions that they can fill, but can never attain full power or like lead a house or anything like that. Now, Drow also breed and raise giant spiders as pets and mounts, and they use spider motifs in all their designs. That's because Lolth is the Spider Queen. She's the dark goddess of spiders and darkness and evil and all that kind of stuff. But her main motif is spiders and webs. And so because their society is built around Lolth, all their architecture and clothing and all that kind of stuff is mirrors that, including their that they raise giant spiders as like pets and stuff like that. Now, Lolth actually resides in the Abyss, though she's not technically considered a demon lord or lady. She is actually she is considered a goddess, but she does reside in the Abyss in a place called the Demon Web. And this like dark, horrible realm is actually a place where she can call Drow to. She can bring the Drow to the Demon Web and test them. She pulls priestesses typically and tests them in the Demon Web, and if they succeed, they come back to their society and they're rewarded with great power and influence and position. But if they fail, they're transformed into things called Driders, which are Drow, but instead of legs, they have the lower half of a spider. So they have a body and an abdomen and 8 legs. Driders they actually look pretty dope. It's kind of like a spider centaur almost, and they actually do have a stat block featured in the monster manual. But the Driders, even though they look really cool and are pretty cool monsters, the Drow hate them because it represents someone who failed to gain Lolth's favor, and they are banished from society. They're treated as outsiders. They cannot be let back in by the Drow, and they have to survive on their own in the Underdark. But if you succeed the test of the Demon Web, you actually are rewarded greatly. So it's kind of like a risk. Either turn to a Droughter and get banished, and probably get killed out in the Underdark by other various monsters, or be rewarded and get great power and influence and position within the Drow society. Now, Lolth loves power, and she teaches her elven followers, these Drow, to obtain power under any circumstances. Now, this has led to a dangerous and bloody web of rumors, conspiracies, and assassinations as the Drow vie for a higher position in the ladder. Owning slaves, whether they be mindless troglodytes or captive surface elves, is a sure sign of prestige and power. Power, influence, position, that is really what is the driving force behind all the Drow and all their thinking processes. Definitely when it comes to the women, because men can only attain a certain position, they're probably going to want to try to vow for the highest position they can possibly get. But even then, that's only like the head of the house military, or something along those lines, or a favored consort of the queen, or of the house matron. But the women can, possibly attain really higher up positions in the priestesshood of Lolth, or even become a matron of a house, which is like the highest possible position you can attain. And because Lolth, it teaches the Drow that power is what matters, and to try to obtain power under any circumstances, they are constantly trying to climb up the ladder of power and obtain more power, even if it harms others. Whether they send an assassin towards someone above them so they can obtain their position, or plan conspiracies, or try to frame the person above them for heresy, whatever it is, Lolth loves that, and she teaches her people, her Drow, that is all that matters, and to do whatever it takes to get power. And this makes Drow society a very dangerous, intrigue-based, bloody society, which is, of course, opens the doors for really cool adventure, plot lines and such. But if you're a Drow yourself, that's not the best existence. That's kind of a rough existence there. Also, on the note about slaves, like, Drow love to show off their power and influence as well. If they have a high position, they want everyone to know it. And owning slaves is kind of a big one there. If you have lots of slaves, or a certain kind of slave or whatever, then people will recognize you as having lots of power and influence. Now, typically their slaves, the Drow slaves will be some other creatures in the Underdark, whether it be Duergar, underground living dwarves, or Darrow, underground living gnomes, or even just troglodytes, or something like that, or big kind of lizard creatures, or whatever it is, trolls, anything like that. They can take those as slaves as well, just as other monsters within the Underdark. But another one is surface elves, or just surface creatures, whether they're humans or dwarves or halflings. So even though the Drow live underground, they've lived in the Underdark for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years. They are accustomed to the darkness. They can see very far in the darkness, and they despise the sunlight. The sun hurts them. It hinders them. Really big setback for them to be doing anything while in sunlight. But sometimes they will go to the surface at night to raid settlements, to collect slaves, or just to harass the surface elves. Like how the surface dwarves have a big rivalry with the Duergar, the underground dwarves, and they are constantly just fighting, just because of an ages long disagreement and rivalry. Sometimes it's not even just for resources; it's just fighting just to harass the other race of people. The same thing is kind of true for the elves. The Drow hate the surface elves. High elves, wood elves, it doesn't matter. They hate the surface elves who serve Corellon rather than Lolth, and will sometimes just go up there just to harass them, just to attack them, raid them, take their supplies, kill their people. Most of the time, these raids are actually to take slaves, because humanoid slaves are obviously much more useful than things like troglodytes or trolls. But it's a common thing for the Drow to raid surface elf settlements, or tribes, or whatever it is, to collect slaves, or just try to hinder them, because of their ages old rivalry. Now, there are Drow renegades, right? Exiles, and people born with the innate morality of a good aligned person. Drow who grow up in Drow society, but don't agree more morally with how the society is run and the rest of their Drow brethren. And these people can eventually lead a life on the surface, but they are very rare. However, typically if a PC is playing a Drow, right, because Drow is a playable race, if someone's playing a Drow as their character, they're playing a character like this. Someone who was banished from their society, their Drow society, or is in exile, or they ran away, and they just, they have an innate morality that goes against the society they were brought up in. They're actually more good aligned than evil aligned, like their people. There is a lot of controversy in the D&D community about like Drow as a playable race and playing a good aligned Drow character. There's a group of people who are just like, hey, Drow are really cool. They look awesome. They're just badass. I want to play a Drow. I like the concept of like a renegade Drow who like is trying to do the right thing even though it's against the evil alignment of his people, who's kind of in exile and stuff. And there's another group of people who are like, no, it's canon. Drow are bad, evil people. It's just extremely rare for a Drow to ever come to the surface and live life as an adventurer. That kind of only happens in the instance of like Drizzt in the Legend of Drizzt series. But it's no one should be allowed to play Drow because it just doesn't make sense narratively. It breaks up the thematic elements of the game or whatever. So you have these kind of two different sides of the issue. It's up to you to figure out what you want. Most likely you'll just be like, hey, you can play Drow. Drow are cool. Just, you have to come up with a reason of how your adventure on the surface, and not, living like an evil, horrible assassin person underground in Drow society. But, otherwise, yeah, it's up to you. Some fantasy fiction purists and such, veteran players will, don't want people to be playing Drow or anything like that just because it's just, they think they don't like it. Drow are just evil underground elves. They can't be adventurers or anything like that. So this kind of debate has been going on for a long time. So it's just kind of for you to figure out where you stand. But let's get into their stats here, and into the mechanical pieces of a Drow in 5th edition. Now, in 5th edition, a basic stat block is given for a regular Drow. But because the Drow have a society with individuals of different skill sets, there are also different stat blocks for the different kinds of Drow that are provided in the monster manual as well. These will be discussed in the variant section after I just talk about the basic stats of a Drow. So the basic stats of a Drow in 5th edition, they're medium, humanoid, neutral, evil. They have basic AC and HP for their challenge rating, which is 1/4. And they have average ability scores across the board. They just have slightly higher dexterity and charisma than their other ability scores, but otherwise it's just completely average, like 10 to 12. They have dark vision up to 120 feet, and also they can only speak Elvish and Undercommon. All the Drow in all the stat blocks of Drow provided in 5th edition, whether it be from the Monster Manual or Board and Kindness Tome of Foes, can only speak Elvish and Undercommon. And I have an issue with this. I have talked about this before in other different Monster Mondays or just other episodes. I don't like it when my monsters can't speak Common. Obviously, every character that you make, every PC you make, will be able to speak Common, right? Every race you can choose from can speak Common. You're going to be speaking Common like 99% of the game. In rare cases will it matter that you can speak Elvish or Dwarven or Primordial or whatever. Depending on the campaign setting and how your DM likes to run things, it may come up more often that it matters what languages you have. But for the most part, like 98% of the time, Common is how everyone communicates, and everyone in the party can obviously speak Common, so that's how they can communicate with each other and with NPCs. And when you have intelligent monsters who can't speak Common, it makes it so that not even all of the party can communicate with them, and I don't like that. I love having my monsters be able to communicate with the party. Whether because I like during combat, like conversations during combat and taunts and battle cries and all that kind of stuff. I love them to be able to discuss during combat, but also outside of combat, right? I mean, you're not probably going to be always, encountering the Drow inside of combat. They have this whole big society and stuff that the party might have to infiltrate or whatever it is, and you're probably going to have role-playing encounters and such with Drow. Because they are intelligent creatures, they're elves, they can, they're learned, they can speak a language, they're not like a bear or anything. I just think they should be able to speak Common, just be able to communicate with all the people in the party. makes it so there's not a weird barrier when it comes to role playing. It just makes it so that it's just role playing is just more drawn out when like you have to communicate through the one person in the party who can speak Elvish or the one person in the party who can speak Undercommon. It's weird, and I just don't like it. I think every monster who should be able to be intelligent and speak intelligently should be able to speak common so that they can communicate with the party during combat and all that kind of stuff. It just makes the game more interesting, and having this weird language barrier just doesn't really add much to the game, I find. It just kind of prolongs the game, drags it more, and I just don't really like that a lot. Giving them additional languages outside of common, though, 100%. If the Drow want to be communicating secretly while in the presence of the party, and they can want to use Elvish or Undercommon, like, that makes sense. That's totally fine. That's cool, and maybe only one of the people in the party can understand what they're saying. That's different. But just having a basic role-play encounter, basic conversations during battle, I just like it best when the monsters can be able to speak common. Of course, this is up to you and what you want to do, but if I were a dungeon master and I want to use Drow in my game, I'm just going to give them all the ability to speak common. Just to make everything easier, because I care really more about like the story and the role playing of it than like the intricacies of how it works thematically. Drow also have basic elven abilities like Fey Ancestry and the ability to innate spellcast simple spells like Darkness, Dancing Lights, stuff like that. A couple of the higher level ones can cast like Levitate on themselves. Very simple innate spellcasting things that they probably won't use much in combat, more outside of combat. And then, of course, they have sunlight sensitivity. This is also a feature that Drows get if you choose to play them as a playable race, which means they have disadvantage on attack rolls and perception checks that rely on sight while in sunlight. Which is a big reason a lot of people don't even play Drow in 5th edition because of this. If you're an adventurer, most of your adventures are probably going to be on the surface, and a lot of your fights may be in sunlight, and you're going to have disadvantage on all your attack rolls, while in sunlight makes you very weak in combat. You're only like at the level of everyone else in the party when you're underground or fighting at night. So this sunlight sensitivity makes sense. Some DMs, like if someone's playing a Drow as their character, just remove this ability just so it doesn't hinder them, and so that they can just play their character as a surface dweller, and it's fine. But it should make sense for the Drow monsters, because using this sunlight sensitivity against them is something that the party can be able to use and should be able to figure out and then implement in their attacks against Drow. If they figure out that, the Drows are sensitive to sunlight, then one of the spellcasters casts daylight at the beginning of, the battle, then all the Drow in the battle are at a disadvantage now. And that's really cool, and that's like a tactical thing that the party can pick up and learn. And it's a weakness of the Drow that can be used against them. So I think you should keep sunlight sensitivity into the stat blocks of the Drow. But depending on how you want to play and how harsh you want to be, if one of your players is playing a Drow, you may want to remove the sunlight sensitivity feature, just so they don't, have just a bad time most of the encounters that they fight in. Then the basic Drow has a short sword and hand crossbow attack. Very simple. Except the crossbow attack, after dealing damage, forces the target to make a Constitution saving throw or become poisoned for 1 hour. If they fail this con save by 5 or more, they are knocked unconscious. So they don't fall to 0 hit points. They still have their hit points. They just fall unconscious, and it takes another creature an action to wake them back up. I have mixed feelings about this. I think that this poison crossbow attack is pretty powerful. First of all, being poisoned for 1 hour, that is kind of a big deal. Now, this Drow is only challenge rating 1/4. So, like, you can be facing a Drow at first level, and, like, you'll have a fair fight. You can be fighting the party can be fighting multiple Drow at first level and be able to, like, win, because they're only challenge rating 1/4. However, at first level, getting poisoned for an hour is not fun. The poison condition, if you're not familiar, gives you disadvantage on, like, basically everything. Like attack rolls and all that kind of stuff. And this typically when you're poisoned by some kind of effect, whether it's from a spell or from like a monster attack, you get to continue making Constitution saving throws at the end of your turn, and if you succeed, then you end the poison condition. But with this attack, you're just poisoned for an hour if you just fail the upfront Constitution saving throw, which is kind of a big deal. You have to just wait out the hour for the poison to be gone, or get lesser restoration or something like that cast on you, or drink some sort of like potion that gets rid of your conditions. You can't continually make the saving throw at the end of each of your turns to try to end the poison condition. So that's pretty strong, which means that if you get hit by one of these and you've just failed this Constitution saving throw, for the rest of this combat for sure, and maybe even any other encounters you have in the next hour, you're having disadvantage on all your attacks and all that kind of stuff. Dexterity saving throws and all that, which is kind of a big deal. That puts you at a big disadvantage. Also, failing this Constitution saving throw, which the DC is 13 by the way, by 5 or more, which means getting an 8 or lower, you fall unconscious, and someone has to use their whole turn basically to wake you up. That is very strong, definitely for a first or second level party who might be facing these 1/4 challenge rating Drow. That just puts someone out of the fight. They may have them skip their whole next turn. So this crossbow attack is actually pretty powerful. It also deals an average of 7 damage, which can down a first level wizard in one hit in some circumstances. So I think this is something you may want to shift a little bit if you're going to be throwing Drow at the party when they're in the very earlier levels, because they have a pretty high chance at the earlier levels to be saving this Constitution saving throw. And getting poisoned for an hour or even falling unconscious and being poisoned for an hour is a really rough time and can actually lead to a PC death like pretty easily. So if you are running these 1/4 challenge rating Drow, these just regular Drow stat block, and throwing them against a first or second level party, be careful with this hand crossbow attack. You may want to change it or alter it a bit. Maybe make the saving throw repeatable at the end of each of their turns or something like that. Because this can really turn the tides of a fight like really, really quickly. There's definitely a chance that if the way the dice roll, when the Drow act on an initiative, they knock out like every single person in the party, and that's basically like a TPK at that point. So yeah, this is pretty powerful. So you're gonna want to have to keep an eye on this. Of course, once they're like kind of 5th level and up, they're probably going to be succeeding most of this Constitution saving throw most of the time or whatever. So it's not too much of an issue, and it's a pretty balanced attack. Okay, let's talk about variants. So like I mentioned previously, Drow take on many different stations in their society. And so the various variants of Drow are the different kinds of occupations. Stat blocks for elite warriors, mages, and priestesses are provided in the monster manual, while stat blocks for arachnomancers, favored consorts, house captains, inquisitors, matron mothers, and shadow blades are all included in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, which is one of the Dungeons & Dragons supplements. So let's start with Elite Warriors. Elite Warriors are guards, raiders, and overseers, and they're just like a more skilled version of the typical Drow. They are challenge rating 5 rather than 1/4, and they're just essentially better versions of the Drow stat block. They have higher armor class and hit points, and their attacks are better. They can make more attacks in a single turn. They have a higher chance to hit, and they deal more damage with their attacks. Pretty basic, just like a challenge rating 5 version of the challenge rating 1/4 typical Drow stat block. Mages are primarily male Drow, and are skilled spellcasters who don't have the build of fighters. So like I mentioned before, Drow don't have a lot of male Drow don't have a lot of choices when it comes to what their occupation can be, because they can't attain the higher levels that females can. If their body is kind of built for like fighters, then they typically become guards, elite warriors, things like that. If their bodies are not really built for that, and they're more attuned to like they're wise or intelligent or something like that, they more point towards becoming mages. Now the mage stat block is challenge rating 7, and these Drow are considered 10th level spellcasters. They have a ton of spell slots and just some classic wizard spells, just a classic wizard Drow. And they also have the ability to attempt to summon a demon once per day. I didn't really talk about this before, but the The Drow have a big connection to demons. Obviously, the goddess they serve, Lolth, dwells in the abyss where all the demons live, and she has her own realm, the demon web, in the abyss where tons of demons live. Um, and so the Drow can have a connection to demons. They might try to summon demons to get a deed done, or to serve as their slaves, or to act as a guardian or something like that. Um, in fact, Yogg-Lols, I believe that I'm pronouncing that correct. Yogg-Lols are a shape-changing kind of demon that they're also found in the monster manual. That are like the handmaidens of Lolth, and these kinds of demons can take the form of a Drow. So typically, lots of Drows believe that the Drows around them, their mentors or their matron or someone like that, is actually a Yogg-Lol that has changed their shape and is spying for Lolth to find heretics or anything like that, people who aren't obeying Lolth's commands. And so Drow are always careful about what they do in front of other Drow, just in case one of them is a Yogg-Lol, a demon handmaiden of Lolth. Other demons also kind of serve Lolth in different regards, and there's even creatures called Draglofts. Draglofts are provided in the Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes book, their stat block is. They're kind of these big, four-armed, feral drow-looking creatures, kind of like a drow werewolf almost. And the Draglofts come about when a drow has a child with a glabrezo, which is a big, scary demon. So there's been like multiple instances where like priestesses will like summon a ton of demons and then like, have children with them, and then like in just this weird like revelry celebration of Lolth's favor or whatever. It's weird and creepy, and the Drow are just kind of scary people. But Draglofts come of that, which are these weird Drow werewolf kind of looking guys. Drow have a pretty big connection to demons because of the goddess they serve, and so mages and a couple other characters can attempt to summon a demon, which can be a really cool moment in the middle of a battle or an encounter when the Drow enemy begins to actually try to summon a demon and succeeds and like summons a new crazy chaotic enemy into the battle. That's always really cool. Okay, priestesses. They are challenge rating 8 and are exclusively female Drow. Only female Drow can attain the position of priestesses of Lolth. Now, they are also considered 10th level spellcasters, but their spells are more cleric than wizard ones. And they also wield a snake whip, a whip with a bunch of snake heads, which is actually quite powerful if they ever use in their attack. I mean, typically in combat they're going to be casting spells, but in the chance that they make an opportunity attack or something, they can attack with this snake whip, and it's actually pretty strong. And these priestesses also have the ability to attempt to summon a demon once per day. Okay, so those are the stat blocks from the things in the monster manual. Now getting into the ones in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. So Arachnomancers. Arachnomancers are challenge rating 13. And they're kind of like warlocks. Mages are like wizards, priestesses are like clerics, and Arachnomancers are like warlocks. They have the ability to change between drow and giant spider form, or cast a bunch of classic warlock spells. And they have pact magic. So they cast spells in the same way that warlocks do. The weird way that like spell slots and stuff works, like that how warlocks cast spells, rather than typical spell casting like clerics, wizards, bards, all that kind of stuff. And they also have the ability to speak with spiders, which is pretty cool. So they're one of the more powerful spellcasters of the Drow, and they also have the ability to turn into a giant spider, which is really cool. And their like abilities as a giant spider are also pretty powerful. So it's not too crazy that they won't even be casting spells, or they might just turn into a giant spider. They have a ton of versatility in their stat block. Their Arachnomancer is probably my favorite Drow stat block, because they ability to like turn to a giant spider and attack up melee, or cast a ton of really cool warlock spells. I really like the way that Drow Arachnomancers work, and I really like their stat block and the versatility of their options. So they're pretty exciting to run in combat for sure. Okay, next are favored consorts. These are like the attractive male Drow priestesses and matron mothers taken as consorts. Now, in the book, in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, they're explained as easily disposable, and they're only valued for their beauty or tricks. But the stat block is challenge rating 18, and they are crazy powerful wizards. I don't fully understand why favorite consorts are so powerful. It's a little confusing to me because the way that they describe them are just like attractive male and who are chosen by priestesses or matron mothers as consorts, whether because of their beauty or because they actually do have some power and some magical skills, but not as much as challenge rating 18. So I'm a little confused because they seem like they're more of like a boss than like a side little enemy in a fight, where the main enemy in that fight would be like a priestess or the matron mother that these consorts serve. Yeah, they're really strong, and I don't fully understand why. Um, but yeah, they're pretty cool. They kind of mix spellcasting with weapon attacks, so they're pretty awesome. But they're very strong, and I'm a little confused why they're so strong because the way they're described does not make them sound like they should be challenge rating 18. But whatever. That's the favorite consort. Next are Drow House Captains. Drow House Captains are typically male Drow, and they are the ones who lead a house's military forces. They're challenge rating 9 and are just kind of stronger elite warriors. So at the weak end of the spectrum is just the typical Drow stat block, the challenge rating 1/4. Stronger than that is the elite warrior, challenge rating 5, and then stronger than that is the Drow House Captain, which is challenge rating 9. So they have high armor class, high HP, high, really good attacks. They can make lots of attacks during a turn, and they have a high chance to hit, and they do lots of damage. Just like a strong fighter, a strong Drow fighter. But because they are captains, they also have the ability to be able to like command their allies to take a couple different like actions and such. So they kind of serve as leaders on the battlefield. But yeah, that's Drow House Captains. Next are Inquisitors. Inquisitors are assassins and spies, and they are challenge rating 14, I believe. Yes, 14. They have some powerful cleric spells. They're not super crazy. They're considered a 12th level spellcaster. They have some cool kind of spiritual weapon, harm, banishment, bane, cure wounds, whatever. This like cleric spellcasters. And then also they have death lances, which are these powerful necrotic weapons that like sap the life force of their victims when they attack. Pretty cool. Inquisitors are awesome. They're challenge rating 14. I think they can only be women. I'm not completely sure, but they're assassins, spies, those kinds of characters. And they also have the ability to be able to discern when someone is lying, which is a small little ability, a little feature, but can, come to play once in a while during role-playing encounters and such like that. So Inquisitors are pretty cool. And I like that they have the option to be casting these spells or be attacking with their Death Lance. So yeah, I like Inquisitors. Okay, next are Matron Mothers. These are, of course, the heads of the house. They are challenge rating 20. They're the most powerful Drow. Stat block. They are 20th level clerics. So they have tons of cleric spells all the way up to, they have all the way up to 9th level spell slots. And they wield demon staffs, which are some pretty cool weapons that they don't do a lot of damage, but they can frighten the creature they hit, which is always a really cool thing to be able to do. Frighten is a really cool condition in combat and can turn the tides quite quickly. And they can also attack with a tentacle rod. Yep. A tentacle rod. That is, I guess, like a staff with a bunch of tentacles on the end. Once again, this does not do a lot of damage, but if they hit, they like impose some kind of thing on the attacker if they fail at a Constitution saving throw, like their speed is halved, or they can't use reactions, or whatever it is. There's a weird little effect that kind of hinders their movement and capabilities during their turn. So that's pretty cool. Once again, they'll probably be using their spellcasting most of the time during combat, but if they ever need to make an opportunity attack or something like that, they'll attack with their demon staff to try to frighten an opponent and deal more damage, or the tentacle rod to try to impose some kind of debility on them. Now, Matron Mothers are also legendary creatures, so they do have some legendary actions, like the ability to attack with their demon staff, or like cast a spell. And they can also compel demon with their legendary actions, like force a demon they see to be able to attack someone else. And so that means, yes, they have the ability to summon a demon. Um, I believe they have. Okay, no. So most of the abilities to summon a demon that Drow have a percent chance, typically like 30% chance to summon a demon. Apparently, Drow Matron Mothers, looking at the stat block now, can just do it straight up once per day. No chance. They can just do it. So that's pretty cool. And then they can compel this demon to do stuff with their legendary actions. They have a couple other like little abilities like magic resistance and such, but other than that, that's the Drow Matron Mother. Okay, then finally there is Shadow Blades, Drow Shadow Blades. They are kind of the ultimate stealth assassins. They kind of act as mercenaries. They are challenge rating 11, and they have the ability to like teleport between shadows, take out enemies with their powerful shadow swords. They're pretty strong fighters, and you know they can be a pretty cool combatant. There are obviously lots of different variants for the Drow in 5th edition. Lots of different stat blocks ranging from challenge rating 1/4 all the way up to 20. And I really like that. I really like that a lot. It means that you can run an encounter with Drow. You can run an adventure that involves the Drow at kind of any level in that the party is. Because early on they'll just face the easier Drow, and the kind of the bosses of those fights will be like elite warriors or mages or priestesses. Maybe even like Drow house captains. Then later on, kind of mid-level, they can be facing like regular elite warriors, just on instead of like the classic 1/4 Drow, be fighting like inquisitors and such. And then when they get even higher level, they can finally face the Drow Matron Mother, Shadow Blades, all that kind of stuff. So I really like that there's a ton of different challenge rating scales between the different Drow, so you can really run a Drow adventure at any level. So I think that's really cool, and I like that a lot. And I think they're all varied enough, and they have some cool, unique abilities that, running combat with them will be exciting and interesting, depending on what kind of variant you choose, like Inquisitors, Arachnomancers, Shadow Blades, whatever it is. Okay, now I want to talk about campaign integration. How do you take these really cool monsters, these Drow, and put them into your campaign? Now, Drow are super iconic, and they're very thoroughly developed through tons of books and guides. Now, because of this, there is a plethora of lore and story hooks to choose from and put into your campaign, making the Drow a very easy monster to integrate. They, of course, fit well into any Underdark adventure, and can serve as cunning and devious foes rather than the classic mindless monsters of the Underdark. The Underdark is a classic, iconic environment to run D&D adventures in, going underground, and there's tons of monsters that are made specifically for the Underdark. Like 25% of the creatures in the monster manual are Underdark monsters. There's tons of really cool things in there, like Mind Flayers, one of my favorite monsters. That's what I did the first Monster Monday actually on. If you haven't seen that episode, go ahead and check that one out after this one. That one's really cool. Mind Flayers are really cool monsters. Those are essentially exclusively Underdark monsters, plus the Drow. But most of these monsters are kind of like mindless things, like trolls or troglodytes or cave fishers, things like that. And the Drow can kind of serve as more like intelligent, cunning Underdark enemies instead of just kind of the mindless beasts. So that's really cool. Of course, their highly detailed and structured society honestly, it can open the doors to a whole intrigue-based campaign where the party plays as Drow from a single house, trying to climb the power ladder, undermine the other houses. This is probably a campaign that has been played in many different houses by many different people, just because so much detail has been put into the Drow society, and there's so much information on it from all the different novels and books and modules and rule books out there. It's just such a great place that's well thought out and thoroughly developed. And really, it's just a great setting to run an intrigue-based campaign in, where everyone plays a Drow, from a house, and they're trying to like increase their power and solve mysteries and kind of take out the other matrons, all that kind of stuff. A whole campaign can honestly be based around that, so that's really cool as well. And campaign set in the Underdark, or that heavily featured the Underdark, could also have the Drow as the campaign's main antagonists, and that would work very well. Drow can definitely serve as main antagonists, or like a single Drow matron mother or whatever. They are fantastic at serving as main antagonists. They're also quite fun for even just random encounters in the Underdark, like a raiding party of Drow or a hunting Drow party, whatever it is. But they also serve as great campaign antagonists, or like the main villain of like a single plotline or adventure as well. However, the Underdark is a stuffy, uncomfortable place. Players, I found, don't really like to be in the Underdark for very long. They like being out on the surface, being able to travel to different continents and regions and different cities. And the Underdark can kind of feel kind of restricting, and this atmosphere is obviously something that you can use to your advantage to create a really ominous, kind of stuffy feeling on the party. But players don't typically like to be in the Underdark for very long. So if your campaign isn't about that underground life, it may be annoying if the Drow are like the main campaign villains to have your party continually travel down into the Underdark to deal with the Drow. Just because, unless like your campaign is specifically like set in the Underdark, everything's about the Underdark, you're going to be playing in the Underdark the whole time. A lot of players don't really like to be in the Underdark for very long. Underdark is a great place for just like a single adventure, right? Like couple sessions in the Underdark doing an adventure down there. Obviously, it's a great environment for that. But having to continually go down into the Underdark and such can be a little annoying and be a little uncomfortable for the players. Now, in my home campaign that lasted a couple years, that we finished a couple months ago, one of the PCs in the party was a renegade Drow who left his home in the Underdark and became an adventurer on the surface. This is what I was talking about earlier, kind of those people who want to play Drows who are adventurers on the surface, who kind of had different moral standing than their city that they grew up in and stuff. I had no problem with this. I'm okay with my players playing Drow if they want to. But it's up to you and your play group if you guys are okay with people playing as Drow. Now I was able actually to weave in the storyline that they were playing on, plus his background, so that they had to travel to his old home, the old Drow city he grew up in, to find a certain item and information. Now this city was like under attack by demons, and the storyline was more focused on like one that was about demons and gods that was already going, rather than like the Drow themselves. But they still had a great time going through the city and fighting dark elves. But we did miss out on the cool societal aspects of the Drow, because the city was kind of like under attack by demons and stuff, and it was more like a stealth infiltration mission rather than like a thing where like, they navigate the bureaucracy of the Drow and all that kind of stuff, which is really cool. Because the storyline that we were on at that point was more focused on the demons and the gods themselves, and the Drow city was just kind of a vessel for that adventure, for that story. I did use a ton of these cool Drow stat blocks and such, so it was a lot of fun, but we didn't really explore the aspects of the Drow society and all that kind of stuff. So that's my personal experience with the Drow. So I have played with them for sure. One of the PCs was a Drow. I've used a lot of these different stat blocks. I really like the Drow. They're really cool. And obviously there's so much information on them. Whether you read the Legend of Drizzt books or the War of the Spider Queen books, or whatever, Drow are really cool. They're really awesome monsters, and they have a lot of potential in a lot of different aspects. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, you guys. This one was a lot of fun to make. I always like doing Monster Mondays, one of my favorite parts of the month. There's so many really cool monsters in D&D, and I love to be able to tell you guys about it. Hopefully you were inspired. Hopefully, as a dungeon master, maybe you want to use these guys in your next adventure or in your next campaign. Hopefully this helped you, inspired you, made you want to look further, explore these monsters a little bit more. That's really awesome. Once again, if you want to keep up with the podcast updates of what's going on and other stuff that we're doing here outside of just the podcast, go ahead and follow us on Instagram at D20 Academy. And of course, telling your friends, telling your play group, telling the people that play D&D or people you want to get into D&D about the podcast is really a lot of help. But other than that, guys, thank you so much for listening and have a great week.